Story 1. Chemical. If you asked me how long we've been down here, I wouldn't know. We don't see the sun, and nobody seems to have a watch. It doesn't matter anyway. We don't have anywhere to be. For all we know, there isn't anywhere left to be. The surface has surely been overrun with death and decay by now. There are 6 of us left. Until just recently there were 7. Her screaming has stopped now, and I feel relief. It was hard to sleep with those agonizing screams, and the banging on the steel door. Huddled in my blankets, I okay around at the other survivors, for men and a woman, all of us unkempt and haggard. At one point we all worked here, but since the accident it's become our prison. The painfully low amount of food is in a pile in the center of the room, so we can all keep an eye on it to make sure nobody is taking more than we're allowed per day. There's enough food for 3, maybe, for meals. None of us want to think about it. We just stare. There are no beds, just piles of blankets and paper that make crude sleeping areas. There's one bathroom at the far end of the complex, and it has running water. There are 3 other rooms we use to work in, filled with computers and lab equipment. It has accumulated a fine layer of dust. We still have power somehow, so all the security cameras and lights still work. Unfortunately, none of the computers work because they've been shut and locked. As per emergency protocol, any contact with the outside world is non-existent. We worked for the military, doing basic chemical research. Somewhere along the line a chemical was leaked, and the results were fatal. People who came into direct contact with THC chemical succumbed to vomiting, mild at first, then intense, until they had nothing to excrete except for their own blood. Nobody lasted more than a couple hours once they had touched the chemical. It also spread through saliva, bile, and blood, so those with the misfortune of coming into contact with even a single drop are doomed. We had to toss that woman out because we caught her vomiting in the toilet. She said she was pregnant and that it was only morning sickness, but you can't be sure. Her fiancé, Barry, tried to intervene, calling us animals. We clubbed him over tea. He had then tied and gagged him to a thick pipe at one end of the room. He strains against the bonds and screams into the gag occasionally, a fierce and wild-eyed look on his face. It's for his own good, and the good of everyone here. He might hurt someone. He needs to be untied and fed eventually, but nobody wants to be the one to do it. So we just sit and stare at the pile of food on the floor that gets lower with each ration meal. He's another mouth to feed that we can't afford. Everyone is on edge, twitchy and jumpy. Every movement is watched intently with suspicious and unrelenting eyes. Nobody talks anymore. They just stare. We all know we're going to die. It's just a matter of time before hunger or the chemical gets us. It's all in the backs of our minds, eating away at our sanity. It's been a while now since the incident with the sick woman. Barry died while I was asleep, and our food supplies have run out. I draw the blanket over my head and drift into a fitful sleep, filled with hunger pangs. I'm awakened some time later by the sound of whispers. I can see 3 members of our group huddled in a circle and identify them as Marcus, Daniel, and Eileen. My stirring causes them to look over. Piercing me with savage eyes, they start moving towards me with a hungry look on their faces. Their intent hits me with a sudden burst of fear, and I scramble to my feet. Marcus grabs me by the collar, and it tears as I break loose from his grip. Daniel grabs at my blanket, and I shove him hard against the third attacker, Eileen. They go sprawling, and I spring past them and into the computer room, locking the door as fast as I can. Dragging desks and cabinets, I make a crude and hopefully secure barricade. I see them banging themselves against the door and the windows, glaring at me with feral eyes. Something catches their attention down the hall, and they stop, heads snapping sharply in the direction of the bathroom. The fifth man, Jackson, must have finished using the facilities, unaware of the intent of the other three. He approaches and peers into the window, a puzzled look on his face. I try to scream a warning, but all that escapes my throat is a hoarse rattle. It's too late anyway, and his face is smashed against the glass by one of the others. I stare in horror as his face is smashed to a PU. LP? Each thud resounding through the room like a slow heartbeat. Then his body is taken away, and there is silence. They're gone for now, but they'll be back. Hunger gnaws at my stomach, and I search frantically for any morsel of food. With extreme luck, I manage to find a candy bar in one of the desk drawers and hungrily devour it, thanking whoever it was who had the sweet tooth. My bliss soon passes, and the hunger pains return. I try to sleep, but even the slightest sound jolts me awake. I have no idea how much time has passed, but suddenly they were bashing the blood-smeared window with a pipe. They're going to get in, and I will need to defend myself. There's an emergency axe in one corner of the room, inside a glass case. I smash the glass and retrieve it, and it makes me feel a little better. My anxiety grows along the spider web, cracks on the window with each passing moment. After God knows how many attempts, the window finally shatters, and the wild, barely human face of Marcus peers in. I sit in a chair with the axe out of view and wait. I'm going to die anyway, so I might as well go out fighting. He climbs in, followed by Eileen and finally Daniel. They approach slowly in a mini-skirmish line. When they get close enough, Marcus raises the pipe for a killing blow. Before he has time to bring it down, I swing the axe and slice him in the chest. The pipe clatters to the floor, and as I spring to my feet, Eileen lunges at where I was and crash into the now empty chair. I swing the axe, catching Daniel off guard and delivering a blow to the temple. His blood showers me and stings my eyes, blinding me. Eileen lunges for me again and tackles me round the ankles, sending me to the ground. I managed to hang on to my axe, and as her hands clasp around my neck, I slash her throat. The hands grip tighter for a moment and then loosen, and her lifeless body crumples on top of me. Pushing her off, I stagger towards Marcus, gagging from the strangling I had just received. He was still alive, dragging himself through his own blood towards the fallen pipe. I stick my foot on his back and swing the axe onto his skull, my heart racing. I stumble backwards and am grabbed by hands from behind. The axe is wrenched from my hand, and I feel a sharp prick on my neck. I lose all muscle control and slump to the floor. Through blurred vision, I see men in hazmat suits all around me. I hear the sound of their voices, but they seem distorted and far away. Then the man nearest me speaks, and the words register into my brain with horror. The experiment has gone on long enough, he says, before I sank into total darkness. Story 2. Nick and Nancy. It began around 3 in the morning with a phone call. I was a college freshman, sharing a dorm room with another college freshman. We were both locals, and even though we'd gone to different high schools, it helped us get along. I wasn't exactly feeling getting along with her, though, when her cell phone rang loudly that night. That she had an extremely annoying song set as her ringtone made it even worse. "Hello," I heard her whisper. I could tell she was at least trying, but when you share a bunk bed, every little movement shakes the entire frame. "What, you're breaking up?" "No, don't yell. It won't. Hang on." "What?" There was silence for quite a while, and I thought maybe she had hung up. But finally I heard a painfully loud sigh. At the same time, I heard her slide down the ladder and drop heavily on the floor. "Kelly," she whispered. Then again, a moment later, and slightly louder. "Kelly, what?" I responded in a moan. I purposely groaned it out to let her know I was displeased with being awakened. "Look, I'm really sorry about this. But that was my brother, Nick. He's drunk at a party, and he wants a ride home. He's afraid to call our parents because he thinks they'll freak." I had only met Nancy's brother on move-in day. They'd introduced themselves as Nick and Nancy. Thick as thieves, I thought they were weird. I knew why she was telling me this. I had a car on campus. D'Ant. Our hometown was only 15 minutes away by car, but I can tell you that wasn't a drive I wanted to make at that moment. At the same time, I knew that if the situations were reversed, I'd be desperate for my roommate to rescue my brother. "What the hell? Tomorrow's Sunday, and you're going to owe me a whole tank of gas, the whole thing, 10 gallons, hey." It was a small car, so shoot me, got decent enough mileage. I've never gotten dressed that quickly on that tired before. I was a bit nervous about this drive, even though Nancy was coming with, and even though it was only a 15-minute drive. 10 of them were through thick woods with barely lighted highways. The real threat was deer. The imaginary threat. Well, I grew up in a town, surrounded by woods. Of course, we tried to scare the pants off one another by telling scary stories about the woods when we were kids. I knew they weren't real, but at what was now 3:30 in the morning, I also couldn't forget them. Despite being exhausted, I tried to stay awake enough to look for deer. Every so often something would glint in the ditches and startle me. It always turned out to be trash or driveway reflectors. Until you've driven down a dark, wooded highway, though, you have no idea how frightening the reflector on a mailbox can be. Nancy broke tea. He's silence. "I keep thinking I see something out there." "Yeah, dear, keep your eyes peeled. The last thing we need is to get into a crash ourselves. I'll keep an eye out for wildlife. But don't call me dear," she said. I knew it was a joke, but the tone wasn't one of amusement. I guess we were both in pretty sour moods at that moment. I was almost starting to feel bad for her brother. I could feel a chewing out coming on. We finally arrived at the house. "Are you sure this is the right place?" "Yeah, his friend Bob's house. I know the place." "Ace, you said there was a party going on, but I don't see any cars, and the lights are out." She looked around. "Maybe it ended in the time it took us to drive over. I heard the party, though, and the line was really terrible. Lots of static. Keep cutting in and out. but I could hear the beat of the music and I could hear talking and laughing. We both got out. A cold wind was blowing. We jumped at every noise as we walked up the drive, stuck close together. Out of nervousness, Nancy knocked on the door. We waited. Nancy knocked again. Once again we waited. As Nancy was in the middle of knocking louder, the front light came on. A scrawny teenage boy, wearing only jeans, answered the door, looking like death warmed over. I had never met him, but I presumed this to be Bob. Nancy, he asked grudgingly, "What are you doing here?" Nick called me to ask for a ride home. It was clear Bob was trying to wake up enough to process what was going on. Yeah, Nick S. sleeping on the couch. Come on in, Nancy. He didn't tell me he called you. We followed him in. Nick said there was a party. I asked. I was trying to be helpful. I felt a bit out of place. Yeah, there was. But it ended around midnight, maybe one of the latest. Nick sure waited a while to call you. He turned on the living room light. I could see what I assumed to be one of Nick's arms sticking out from under the pile of blankets on the couch. "Hey, Nick, your sister is here for you." "Nick, wake up, man," Bob said. He reached out and shook Nick's shoulder. "Hey, get up, Ma, and I want to go back to sleep, nee." We were starting to get nervous. I could hear it in Bob's voice, see it in Nancy's body language, and feel it in my own muscles. Bob finally grabbed the sheets and yanked them off. Nick's face was a pasty white. His lips were tinged with blue. After that, I know what happened, but I am unclear on the order with which things happened. I'm not sure if it was Nancy or Bob who tried CPR first. I didn't know CPR. There was nothing I could do. I didn't even know the address to call the police. But they did come, eventually. Not only the police, but an ambulance. I remember them talking to Nancy afterwards. Once her parents had arrived, there was nothing you could do. They estimate he died around 1. Long before you arrived. I know is hard on you, but we won't definitively know what happened until the coroner's report. But that's impossible. He just called me at 3 to pick him up. That's how I knew to come here, Nancy argued. It's true I heard the call. It woke us both up. Well, that's happened before, girls, where our initial findings are proven wrong by the proven wrong later. He said I could tell he was trying to avoid the word autopsy. Or maybe you were mistaken about the time of the call. It was late. We drove over immediately. I'll prove you wrong right now, Nancy H. hissed, taking out her phone. I'll show you that he called me at. She looked at her phone. The call isn't showing up in my log. She was frantic. I'm telling you, he called me. How else would I have known there was a party? How else could I have known to come here? How? Nancy sobbed. Never mind that call logs are often wrong. Nancy wasn't thinking straight at the moment. It took her parents and the police to finally subdue her. Nancy ended up leaving in an ambulance as well. A check of Nancy's cell phone records reveal no incoming calls for Nick on that night. Similarly, a check of Nick's cell phone records reveal no outgoing calls or texts from Nick's phone after about 11 that night when he made his final Facebook post. Toxicology and autopsy reports confirm Nick died of alcohol poisoning at 1 in the morning. Story 3. Surprised the phone rang. Phoebe looked at Heather confused. Are you going to answer that? Nah, don't bother, responded Heather. It's just going to be that annoying creep again. How? Asked Phoebe, even more confused. What creep? Wait, I never told you about this guy. She noticed the blank look on her friend's face, which basically answered her question. It's just this guy who somehow got my number and has been leaving messages of him breathing heavily. Oh my God, exclaimed Phoebe, clearly startled. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. No need to worry about it. I'm sure he'll stop calling eventually. Phoebe was about to continue the conversation when the phone suddenly started ringing again. Heather's only response, Washington's to sigh, but Phoebe grumpily began walking towards the phone. What are you doing? Yelled Heather nervously. I'm going to stop this creep from calling you. Don't, started Heather, but Phoebe had already picked up the phone. What do you want? She yelled into the phone. Who's this? A raspy voice responded from over the phone. I'm Heather's friend and I want you to stop calling her. Oh, you're her friend? Said the voice. Then I'll certainly stop calling then. After that sentence was spoken, there was manic laughter over the phone. Tell you what, if you open the front door, I'll never call again. Fine, Phoebe stated as she slammed the phone down and she started walking toward the door. Heather realized what Phoebe was doing and began to protest. No, please, don't open the door. Phoebe rolled her eyes. Chill. It's not like he's going to be there. She opened the door and revealed the completely empty porch. See, I told you that there would be no one here. She closed the door and locked it. Now that pervert won't call. Before she could finish, a man leapt out from into the closet beside the door and plunged a knife deep into her chest. Blood started flowing from where she had been stabbed. Heather started screaming and began running upstairs while she heard the sound of footsteps coming. She quickly behind her. Then everything went black and threw the remote over to the couch after pressing the power button and tried to ignore the glare that her best friend was giving her. Dude, why did you turn off the movie? Asked Chloe. We were just getting to the best part. Because these movies are so stupid, and said as she rolled her eyes. I mean, seriously, would you go and actually open the door? Well, no, Chloe admitted, but if they didn't do that, then this awesome movie would exist. You and I have very different ideas of what's awesome. She started to get up to go to the kitchen when she realized that Chloe was still sitting on the couch, pouting. Tell you what, she sighed, how about we get some snacks and and we can continue watching the rest of your silly movie. Chloe visibly perked up. All right, let's see what we can get find. She stood up and they both walked into the kitchen and decided to have what she insists as the real movie experience, grabbing a bag of popcorn and threw it in the microwave. As she waited for it to finish and for Chloe to finish scrounging around for something to eat, she decided to continue the conversation that they were having before. I honestly have no clue why you like these kinds of movie, she said as she pointed at the cover of the movie that they were watching. They're either about some psycho stabbing teenagers or some demented doll forcing people to cut off their limbs. Well, sure, some of these movies are total garbage, but that's just like any genre. Chloe responded, if you dig enough, you'll find those masterpieces that will scare the crap out of you. Almost as if to prove her point, she grabbed a bag of pretzels that she had found in the back of the cupboards and shrugged. I guess they just aren't my cup of tea." The microwave decided to pick that moment to beep, which made the both of them jump and grab the bag out of the microwave and poured its contents into a bowl. Contented with the smell of buttery popcorn, she began to head out of the kitchen along with Chloe. Chloe continued to walk a few steps, but quickly realized that Anne was no longer beside her. She turned around to find Anne standing in the doorway of the now darkened kitchen. "Hey, Anne, everything okay?" asked Chloe, worried about her friend. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied. "I just thought that I heard something." Chloe started laughing. "Wait a minute," and Dougal asked, "Are you trying to scare me?" "No, I'm not," she said gravely. "I swear I heard something. Must have been the wind." Chloe shrugged. "Or maybe that movie did actually scare you." "That movie scare me," and said defiantly, trying to pretend that she didn't see the smirk on her friend's face. "No way something like that would ever scare me." "Well, let's get back to the movie that totally isn't scaring you," she replied with a joking tone in her voice. Chloe had started to turn back around toward the living room when she saw what looked like a black glove wrap around Anne's ankle. Before she could yell to warn her, Anne was yanked backwards into the kitchen, making the bowl fly out of her hand and spill the popcorn everywhere, and started screaming and tried to get a hold on something, but all that she ended up doing was leaving nail marks on the wooden floor. Chloe ran up the stairs and into her bedroom, locking the door behind her. She sat on her bed, terrified and unsure of what hour had to do next. Her cell was still downstairs and there was no phone upstairs, so she had no way to call the police. She was trying to keep her thoughts focused on surviving instead of panicking when she heard the sound of footsteps slowly going up the stairs. She started to panic and grabbed the baseball bat that she kept under her bed for protection. "Stay back," she yelled. "I have a gun." She was hoping that this thing would take her bluff. When she heard a knock on the door, she tightened her grip on the bat when she heard a familiar voice. "Chloe, are you okay?" "Anne, is that you?" asked Chloe, unsure of what was going on. "Yes, it's me," Anne responded. "I'm sorry. I was trying to scare you. I guess I went too far, you think." Chloe yelled angrily. She started to head toward the door when she thought of something. "Wait, what about the glove?" "Huh? What glove?" asked Anne, sounding extremely confused. "The glove that pulled you into the kitchen," Chloe told her, moving the bat up against her shoulder again. There was a brief pause before Anne responded. "There wasn't any glove pulling me back. I was just pretending that I was being pulled." "You must have imagined it." Chloe tried to think if she could have imagined the glove, but she couldn't ignore the fact that her friend's voice was coming from behind the door, sounding fine, if not a bit out of breath. She dropped the bat and walked toward the door, pulling the chain through the lock. She opened the door and was shocked to see not Anne, but a tall man with a white shirt stained with red smudges. Chloe was taken aback and tried to close the door, but he forced it open, pushing her down on the ground in the same motion. He moved one hand to the right pocket of his pants, pulling out a knife that was still dripping with blood. In his other hand, he had a white box that he moved up to his lips, and when he spoke into it, out came the voice of Anne Surpri. "S.E. Story 4, Arms. I remember when it started. The woman next door was strangled to death in her bed with no sign of forced entry. Although her window was open, she lived on the 5th floor without a fire escape. The killer was never found, and the apartment remained vacant. Some time after she died, I started having night terrors. I would awaken suddenly, gasping for air. One night I opened my window and stuck my head out to take some deep breaths. That's when I first noticed him. A man was standing in the window of an apartment across the street. It was the only one with the lights on, and his body was just a silhouette. I couldn't really make it out at first, but he seemed to be outstretching his arms toward the window. The next night I awoke again in a panic. This time it real. I felt like someone was choking me, but there was no one there. I assumed the incident with the woman next door was just making me paranoid. For the first time in my life, I was a little scared to be alone. As I opened the window for some fresh air, I noticed him again, just as the night before. There was one apartment across the street with a light on, and a man standing in the window with his arms outstretched. Is that all this guy does? I muttered to myself. Maybe he's not right in the head. I had an eerie feeling that he was looking right at me. Boo. It was hard to see. I closed the window, pulled the shades, and went back to bed. I was getting curious about the man in the apartment across the street, so I bought some binoculars. During the day, I watched his window to see if there was anything strange going on. There was no activity, not even any furniture that was visible from the window. Had he moved out since last night? I watched until the sun went down, but no light in the apartment ever came on. That night I dreamed there was a man at my window, like my late neighbor. I live on the 5th floor, and there was no fire escape. It was hard to see his face, but I could feel his eyes examining me. His presence was thick and suffocating, almost intoxicatingly so. I struggled to avoid his gaze as I ran to the window, attempting to close the shades. Before I could scream, he reached right through the glass and put his hands around my neck. I awoke terrified and convulsing. The window was open, though I had closed it earlier. Coffee, and wheezing, I stuck my head out and took in the night air. It was unusually quiet, no cars on the road. Looking down at the street, there was a long stretch of light penetrated by a looming shadow. Reluctantly, I panned up to find the source. Again, there was one apartment across the street with a light on, and a man standing in the window with his arms outstretched. I grabbed my binoculars to get a closer look. Immediately, I was petrified. He was most definitely staring at my window, and his arms seemed to be reaching for me. I locked the window, pulled the shades, and hid under the blankets. Each night I became more paranoid. I stopped looking out my window and kept it locked at all times, with the shades drawn. Even so, I could feel him staring at my apartment. I thought about calling the police, but I still wasn't sure if it was all in my head. Then came that horrible night. As usual, I awoke in hysterics. My window was still locked, but the shades were up. I looked across the street, and the man with his arms outstretched had his window open. This was my chance. If he could hear me, maybe I could get a response out of him. "What the hell are you looking at?" I shouted, but there was no reply. The man remained silent and motionless, his arms extended slightly beyond his open window. I thought he would at least be startled, but he showed no sign of acknowledgement. "Why do you stand there every night?" Still nothing. Just as I turned away, his light went out. I looked back to see if he was still standing there, but it was too dark. I slammed the window shut, locked it, pulled the shades, and turned on the TV. There was no way I was going back to sleep, or at least that's what I kept telling myself until I started to pass out. I couldn't help it, so I shut off the TV and climbed into bed. Later that evening I had another night terror. Feeling like I was being strangled, the sensation didn't stop. However, this time I really was being strangled. Two real hands were clasped around my neck, attempting to squeeze the life out of me. As I struggled to break free, I tried to get a look at my attacker. I followed the arms, expecting them to lead to a body, but they just kept going. They stretched all the way to and through my open window. I couldn't belie that. Arms were reaching into my fifth-story window, all the way to my bed, and were choking me. I flailed around, trying to wrestle away from the freakish extremities. Kicking and scratching didn't faze them, and the grip was so tight that it hurt. To move, I reached out in desperation for the knob on the nightstand drawer. As brittle nails dug into my skin, I managed to get it opened, but trying to reach inside made the choking even more painful. Frantically, I felt around for anything sharp. I grabbed a pen and began stabbing the left arm with every ounce of strength in my body. I don't know how many times I stabbed it, but eventually it pulled back a little, removing the left hand from around my throat. I grabbed it, pulled it to my mouth, and bit down as hard as I could until I drew blood. The arm shook violently, trying to pull its hand from my jaws. Choking on blood, I unclenched my teeth. Both arms began retreating. While I spit and gagged, I stumbled to the window, hoping to slam it down on them, but I just grazed the fingertips. I watched in horror as the arms, which had stretched all the way across the street, retracted back to their source. My heart stopped when I saw who they were attached to. They were his arms. I couldn't look away as the hideous limbs wobbled and whipped, returning to their normal length. He put them down at his sides, and the light went out. This time I didn't just lock the window. I moved the bookcase in front of it. I sat on the floor shaking, trying to get my thoughts together. What was I going to tell the police? A man reached into my window from across the street and tried to strangle me. They'd surely think it was a prank call, but I needed someone to check out that apartment or I would never be able to sleep again. I decided to make a quick, anonymous call about a domestic disturbance. Eventually, two officers pulled up to the building across the street. They went inside, and a light soon came on in the window. I waited for something to happen, hoping I didn't just send two unwary men to their deaths. After mere minutes, the light went out, and the officers returned to their vehicle. Their voices just managed to carry up to my window, and I heard them say what I was hoping they wouldn't. Nobody lived there. A few weeks later, I saw a moving van outside the building. Someone was moving into that apartment. I was relieved, though my night terrors had already stopped. One night I couldn't sleep, so I turned on a light and looked outside. I noticed someone across the street looking out their window. For some reason I felt compelled to reach for them. I'm still trying. Story 5, Tree Line. Orange light flickered and danced in the center of my vision. The dying heat barely reached me now, but there was no going back out there for more fuel at this point. At least it had stopped snowing. I'd always been told not to stare into the fire at night. Keep that night vision sharp. But for some reason I could help it. Like I needed to make sure it was still there. The wide-floored canyon sea, overed in fresh snow, stretched out around me. The only shelter was the large rock in whose shadow I had hastily built the fire. The canyon stretched out into the darkness on opposite ends. One slope was simply a rock face. Millennia of erosion had created an almost vertical wall of great sandstone boulders stretching up over 100 feet. The other slope was a steep hillside covered in dense trees. Not a bit of the firelight penetrated past the first few trees, and what little light there was created dancing, fading shadows upon the great ponderosa pines. The new moon didn't give an ounce of light, but at least with the stars I could make out the faint shapes on either side of the valley. Atop the rock face opposite the tree line, a lone, gnarled tree trunk, lone D, silhouetted itself upon the ridge line against the cloudless sky. The fingers of my left hand were still numb, but at least they had stopped hurting. I had spent too long out there after I had lost the glove, and I knew frostbite had to be setting in at this point. There was no way I was going to stumble through the dark looking for it when I already had a fire going, and the inevitable cracking of branches would give my position away for miles around. Once more I checked my rifle. That clunky wooden piece of shit was like a safety blanket now. Not that I expected to be able to face what was out there with it, but having it close, working the bolt, checking the sight picture, gave me some comfort. That, combined with the soothing warmth of the fire, kept my panic from boiling over. Breathe deep breaths in, out. Can't be more than a few hours till dawn. It can't be, my thoughts, the rifle, the fire. I needed to focus and relax again. I checked the sight picture, heaved the ancient piece of crap up and pointed at the canyon ridgeline, centering the sights on the silhouette of that lone tree poking up from between the rocks. Still trembled the front sight, danced and swayed, refusing to let me hold it steady on the trunk. Damn this hand. Even if I thought I could harm it, there was no way I could shoot straight. Something crackled in the tree line behind me, and I whirled around. My breath caught in my throat, and my skin turned to goosebumps. Something had just moved. God damn it. I struggled to steady my aim at the movement, but the thing had retreated. Leaves and snow crunched and branches snapped as it loped back into the darkness of the tree line. By the sound of it, its strides must have been 6 feet apart. The thing's legs weren't that long, were they? Couldn't have been. Another rustling. Something flew out of the trees at head height and arced towards me. The firelight illuminated a black she-ape flying through the air before it came to rest with a wet thud a dozen yards away. I shuddered. My heart felt like it was about to give out, and despite the heavy coat and the heat of the flames, I felt a chill. I stood stock still for what must have been almost half an hour, scanning my surroundings. I felt frozen to the spot. The thing it had thrown was still a dim shape, lying atop the snow just out of sight. I decided I had the time to see what it was. It wasn't that fast, right? No way it could make it from the darkness of the tree line to meet me before I made it back. I took a few deep breaths, gave one last look around, and steadied myself. Breathe in, out. I made a break for it. I dropped my rifle and made a mad dash for the dim shape. As I grasped it in my ungloved left hand, a freezing chill washed over my palm. It was soaking wet. It was a wonder it hadn't frozen solid already. I sprinted back to the safety of the rock and the fire, scanned the perimeter once more. Then I examined the thing. It was my glove, torn nearly in half and soaked with a viscous, dark fluid. Wasn't water. Didn't think it was blood either way. It should have frozen out there. Had to be 15 below freezing at this point. But the dark fluid sloshed over my hand. I threw it back, useless now. I could picture the thing grinning at its little choke. Bastard, I turned back to my rifle. There was nothing there. A long indentation of the snow. Nothing more. I had dropped it not 10 feet from the fire and I had been out there retrieving the glove for 15 seconds max. It was just gone. No footsteps in the snow other than my own. No noises. God fucking damn it. I whirled around wildly, scanning my surroundings, as the frantic beating of my heart filled my eardrums. My rapid breaths fogged in the air instantly. The pines were still. No wind stirred their branches. Opposite them, the rock face was silent, its lone dead trees still watching over me. Both ends of the canyon stretched into blank darkness. I calmed just barely and looked over my meager campsite, a tall rock on my left with the dying fire in front of me and my pack to the right of the fire, except it wasn't to the right. It was opposite me, across the fire, almost out of its soft glow. I hadn't left it there. No way I could have. I hadn't even been on that side of the fire since I had made it back. Maybe I went a little off course when I was running through the trees, came at my camp from a different angle. No, I had come out facing the cliff face dead on, and my pack was on the right, where I knew I left it. Suddenly, my dwindling sense of safety snapped. The warmth of the fire didn't each past my skin. My heart froze, eyes wide. I wasn't safe. I wasn't safe anywhere. Needed to. To what? The logging road I had been dropped off. It was at least 3 miles away and uphill, and there was no way I'd just happened to run into a passing car at what had to be 4 in the morning. Even if I did make it to the road, the sun was coming up soon, right? It had to, just had to. Hold out a little longer. The orange glow die. I spun around, already shaking, nothing but embers. I whimpered. This was it, no chance now, and so goddamn cold. I stopped, sat down, and curled up on cold hard ground. Maybe its vision was based on motion. If I laid still, it might not even see me. Or maybe it saw infrared. Just had to let myself cool down. Should be easy, just let the biting cold do its work. Odd, I was feeling warmer already. My breath slowed, my heart was still. I could just sleep. Sleep, and I would wake up in the bright daylight and laugh at myself. I felt the sea. He'll finally leave my body. It was replaced by pleasant numbness, then gradually warmth. I still shivered, almost uncontrollably, but that was all right. It was all going to be all right. Relaxed, I opened my eyes once more before I drifted off, staring upwards at the night sky. Odd, I could have sworn there was a dead tree trunk atop that ridgeline. Story 6. The Reaper's Scythe. There is no fear as potent as the fear of the unknown. No monstrous visage discovered yet has been as terrifying as the infinite potential for horror which exists before the mask is removed. That is why we humans, in our naive misunderstanding of the universal order, are gripped by the mortal fear of death. We think it the final frontier, the greatest imaginable unknown from whose penumbral shores no traveler may return, and so we cling desperately on to even the most dreary and anguished lives, suffering any known evil over our release into the beyond. But death is not to be feared, Ed, because death is very well understood. We have witnessed it, caused it, measured and recorded it to the last dying spasm of neuronal flickering. Even as I lay dying, it seemed silly to me that I should be afraid of the emptiness which reason promised to expect. While I was alive, I wouldn't experience death, so there was no reason to be afraid now. When I was dead, I wouldn't be capable of experiencing anything, so fear still had no cause. That thought brought me great comfort as I felt the last erratic struggle from my heart against the inevitable conclusion I approached. It hasn't until I was finally drifting off to sleep that a final intrusive doubt bubbled in my brain. What if it isn't death which is to be feared? What if it is what lies beyond? And so troubled did I slip beyond mortal understanding, stepping into a world as far forsaken by reason as I was now from life. I was still in the hospital room, but the bustle of nurses and the beeping machines lost their opacity as though I was mired in swiftly descending dusk. It seemed as though every sound was an echo of what it once was, every sight a reflection. With each passing moment, the world was becoming less real, but all that sight and sound, all that being, it wasn't simply disappearing. It was transforming into a figure beside me. The less real my room became, the more real the figure was, until presently it existed in such sharp actuality that nothing beside it seemed real at all. His cloak was black, not the color black, but his essence. It was as though seeing a tiger after a lifetime of looking at a child's crude drawing and thinking that's all a tiger was. Reality flowed around his scythe like a brush through watercolors, and I could see each elementa, reparticle and time itself sunder across his blade. Surely this, I thought, this is why we were taught without words to fear death. I clutched at my hospital blanket to cower from the intensity of the Reaper's presence, but the once soft cotton now flowed like translucent mist through my hands. I knew in that moment that nothing could hide me from the specter's grasp, for he was the only real thing in this world. You're late. They weren't words. My head ached from the strain of this knowledge as my lateness was burned into my awareness, imparted like an inescapable law of physics as unequivocal as gravity. We don't have time for the usual speech. Hurry now. I felt myself swept up around him like dirt in a hurricane. Before I knew what was happening, we were outside the hospital, moving at such a frenzied pace that the world around me blurred into a dizzying tunnel of flashing light. If you're lucky, IT will have gotten bored of waiting for you. I had too many questions, all fighting for attention in the forefront of my brain without any making their way out. You're quiet. I admire that. Usually people ask too much. What's the point? I asked. My voice felt flat and dead compared to his overwhelming substance. How can I try to comprehend something so beyond mortal knowledge? You can't, but it's still human nature to ask. We weren't slowing. If anything, our pace was increasing. I wasn't running or flying. or anything of that nature. It was more like the rest of the world was moving around us while we stood still. A vague darkness and a heavy damp smell made me guess that we'd gone underground, but I couldn't say for sure. One question then I asked, what else is here be, as eyed you? And that is why questions are pointless. Death is not a place or a person, it's all there is, troubling thought, but made more so by the growing howl which began reverberating the rocks around me. We still seemed to be descending into the earth, and the air was growing warmer and denser now. The sound continued to mount as though the world itself was suffering. Then what is it? What I'm here to protect you from. The rocks split from a flash of his scythe, and the ground opened further into a sprawling cavern dominated by a subterranean lake. But I thought you said re all there is. No, I said death was all there is. We weren't moving any longer. Light glinted off the scythe from some unseen source and streamed into the lake like a tributary. Once inside, light didn't reflect or dissipate, but swirled and danced like luminescent oil. I thought you were death. Death is not a person. The light was taking a life of its own inside the water. The still surface began to churn with the enigmatic energy. It took my scattered mind along to realize that I was the energy flowing into the lake. I still felt tangled up with the figure, but we now existed as a beam of light boiling into the water. I knew I wouldn't understand, but that didn't stop me from feeling frustrated. If death is all there is, then what is it? What was waiting for me? The water pressed in around me, and I couldn't speak, although I could still draw breath somehow. It is here. Something was in the water around me. Hands grabbed me by the legs and began dragging me downward. I was amazed to even discover I had limbs again. They felt so alien to me that it was almost as though this body was not my own. Light flashed from the scythe. Then again the hands let go, and the howling rose once more. The Reaper was fighting something, although I couldn't make any sense of the battle except for the madness of thrashing water. The howling earth reached its crescendo, and the screams made the water around me convulse and contract like living fluid. Had the Reaper cut it? Was I safe? I began to explore my new body in the water, but just when I thought I was beginning to gain control, the hands clutched me once more. I lurched downward, struggling in vain against their implacable grip. What is here? I tried to shout against the suffocating liquid. What is happening? But I couldn't sense the Reaper's presence any longer. The heat was unbearable, but the cold depths the hands were dragging he toward was even worse. I became aware of a blinding light at the bottom of the lake, and though I struggled, the hands dragged me inexorably onward. I'm sorry, I couldn't fight it off. It seemed be coming from so far away now. We will try again next time. The pressure, the heat, the noise, the hands dragging me into the blinding light. I closed my eyes and screamed. I was free from the water now, but I just kept screaming. I couldn't bear to look at it. Whatever had stolen me, whatever was death but wasn't, whatever even the Reaper could not defeat. Then words spoke, all human words from a real human mouth. My senses were so distraught that I couldn't make sense of them, but I'm guessing they were something like, "Congratulations, he's a healthy baby boy." Most people can't remember the day they die or the day they were born. I happen to remember both, and I know that they are the same. Written by Tobias Wade. If you want to narrate this story, contact the author by clicking here, Story 7, Krakoa. While I am writing this in my home and at the time, I usually fill my journal with my week's exploits. My past entries pale in comparison to what I am about to document in between my last entire and now my mind, which is home to rational and logical thought, has been penetrated by the world of fiction and fantasy. It was late on Tuesday night when I received a letter from my now deceased friend Henry Doctum. Doctum was a complete antithesis to me. He wore black and I wore white. He drank Coke and I sipped Pepsi. I condemned God while he praised E. Very one of them. That, I theories, is why we were always friends. From Stockesley to Oxford there was no one as intellectually stimulating as Henry. The entire spectrum of topics was at our mercy when we gather at the common room. While the original copy of the letter was lost, I can recall the most important points. Henry had invited me to an excavation site located in the Hippoton Mountains in Nepal. He was vague about who hired him to what they were specifically looking for, but said that he needed my help cataloging the items they would find, century they were from, what the inscriptions translated to, etc. Flattered by Henry's invitation, I followed his instructions, and in 2 days I arrived on Nepal soil. It was a 5-mile trek to the site, but the snow only really began to cause concern at the last mile. I arrived, and my vision of like-minded individuals and hard labor working in harmony to further science was replaced by a snowy wasteland. There were hundreds of holes, seemingly going on forever. I nimbly made my way past them, trying to find any sign of life. I finally arrived on a single cabin. It stood isolated in the snow. There was a name carved into the wooden door, Henry Doctum. Filled with hope, I opened the door to find a most horrific sight. Henry wasn't there. His corpse was a pale imitation of the man I once knew. He laid in a bed of papers. They were mostly journal entries, picture, and maps. I was most shocked by the deterioration of his handwriting. The Henry I would never let these mad markings react. Parchment. The only thing linking these papers together was one phrase, Red Temple. It was circled on every map, titled every piece of paper, and the subject of every picture. I stuffed a few pieces of paper into my pocket along with the gun used to end his life. Then I heard it, a crack of lighting. I peered out of the cabin window and saw no clouds. Fearing for my life, I fled Henry's final resting place and went outside there. In the corner of my eye did I see it. The Red Temple stood mockingly on the edge of the cliff behind him. I used Henry's mad markings to guide me up to that terrifying temple. It felt like an eternity in the snow. I didn't know if frostbite was setting in, and I didn't care. My dear friend, a man whose love for runs deep in my soul, had been driven to commit suicide. My mission was clear. The temple was a lot smaller than I expected. I tried to open the Scarlet Sanctuary, but it wasn't budging an inch. I turned to face the sea. Below, my eyes scanned the many holes. Then it clicked. I pulled out the map and looked at it in comparison to my new stance. They were identical. The map must have been drawn from here, then like a constellation in the night sky, the holes aligned, but they formed not a symbol, but a word. Krakoa. As I read out the word, there was a bright purple flash that engulfed the entire dig site, including myself. What happened next would scare Mother Nature and all her children. I woke up on the rim of a volcano. The rim had what originally thought were spikes, but on closer inspection to be massive pillars. These deliberate crafted monoliths stood, erect, riddled with holes. I approach one spire with caution. Suddenly a creature edged out of the shadowy pod. It was nothing I had ever seen before, and hopefully I will never see again. Its head was a perfect sphere. It was covered in millions of eyes. Its body was like a worm. It shuffled towards me, emerging from the shadows. It was the size of a lion. Then a pair of wings sprouted from its back. The winged worm, as I will now refer to it, hovered momentarily. Its seemingly never-ending number of eyes were all staring at me. I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't know what it was going to do with me. All I did know was that I was all alone in a place I might never leave. The magma began to bubble. Indeed, the volcano erupted. A massive creature emerged from the hot liquid almost in response. The pillars and ground beneath my shaking legs began to crack and split. 'Tis an unfathomable amount of these winged worms shot out of the pods like bullets from a gun. I ran to cover to protect myself from the falling hellfire. The winged worms circled the colossus, creating a tornado. Black leather wings, he eye of the storm, a chained giant. I peered out of cover to see what the creature was. It had huge glowing red eyes. Its skin was the tone of rotting flesh. It was lacking nostrils and a point for oral communication. It had a single eye centered at the forehead. No hair grew on this beast. Was stripped bare, but only the torso and above were visible. The rest were still submerged. It had 2 pairs of arms, all 4 of them bound by a chain made of what I now believe to be a living creature. I bared witness to it sliding and slithering around the creature's chest like a serpent. The winged worms began to chant. They spoke so fast, but so low, that I couldn't understand when one word began and the other ended. That, of course, being if they were even speaking words at all, the chant was seemingly successful. Like a child after a tantrum, the beast returned to its volcanic imprisonment. The whirlwind of winged worms dissipated back to their pillars, except one. It saw me behind the pillar, and I saw it. I ran as fast as I could. While I was aware that I was running around the volcano, I didn't know what else to do. It only took a few minutes after the chase began that I felt fatigue sinking in. I then remembered I was bearing arms and produced Henty's handgun. It was a Western revolver. It only carried 6 shots. Knowing that one was used by Henry to end his own life. At best, I knew I only had 5 bullets. I turned to face my foe, and with a swift flick of the wrist I opened fire. I had never fired a gun before, so the shock of the recoil and the sound of the shot caught me off guard. I staggered back. A bit further back than I would have liked, I fell. I don't remember if I hit the creature. I do, however, remember falling and falling and falling until I was completely absorbed into the abyss. I woke up in a hospital ward, without the gun or the note that led me on this odyssey in the first place. After I was discharged, I spoke to the 2 officers who found me. They denied any knowledge of the dig site ever existing in the first place. My trip back to London was one of Tarzan spirits. As I bring this entry to a close, I would like to say, what was that? At the window, a winged worm with 1,000 eyes and another one banging down the door, and another, and